couple days ago, I completely got rid of Windows in my PC. To any normal person, including me just a couple years ago, that would seem like an insane thing to do. What do you mean you got rid of the only operating system that I know? Did you get a Mac or something? First of all, fuck you for assuming I'd ever look at Apple with anything other than disgust. Second, there are actually a lot of operating systems other than Windows and Mac OS. I wouldn't blame people for not knowing this though. Microsoft, Apple, and Google have all tried their best to make sure their operating systems remain at the top. And they've succeeded so much that people don't even know that there are other options. And if they do know that there are other options, they think you need to be like a CIA hacker or something to use them. This is obviously not the case. But if Windows or Mac OS aren't the only options, then what other options are there? So Linux is already the most used operating systems for servers, it's free and open source, and it has a big community constantly contributing to its development. It's also highly customizable, meaning that you can make your system truly your own, instead of having a trillion-dollar company telling you how you're supposed to use your computer. I've personally been using Linux for a couple months now, and while my experience hasn't been the smoothest so far, it's already been so much better and more fun than I've had with Windows since like Windows 7, and I want to talk about it. Not just because I love yapping, evidently, but because I think letting people know what went right and what went wrong with my journey with Linux so far might help someone else with their journey too. And maybe it'll better prepare anyone who might be curious to jump ship. Throughout my life, I've heard about Linux here and there, but I never took it seriously. I was perfectly fine working with Windows, and I didn't really need anything else, especially something that was focused more towards servers and programmers, at least back in the day. But there was another path that was gonna lead me to Linux, and it wasn't quite what I expected. See, I've been watching YouTubers for over half of my life. Fuck, I'm getting old. I started with Spanish-speaking YouTubers, because duh. But as my English got better and better, I started getting into English-speaking YouTubers, one of which was PewDiePie. I watched his content for a few years until he started fading into retirement. I didn't really keep up with his content after that. That is, until I started hearing rumors about him installing Linux?
Something possessed him to put Linux on it.
I had seen that he made a video building his own PC, but I never thought he would install an operating system that was not what we all use. What's up with that? He then made a video about it, and he showcased a lot of the good sides of using Linux, and it caught my interest. What do you mean I can gain full control over my PC by just installing this OS and do whatever I want with it? That was really the main appeal for me, control and autonomy. The second main appeal was privacy. As I recently heard at the time that Microsoft was going to start rolling out Recall, which is a piece of software that takes screenshots of your system and uses AI to restore it if something goes wrong. Suffice it to say, I did not trust that one bit. So I eventually made the decision that I should at the very least look into this Linux thing. Not just to escape the clutches of a trillion-dollar company, but to have the freedom of controlling and using my system the way I want to, rather than however a big tech company wanted me to. And so I started watching a few videos on how to get into Linux. I learned what distros are and which ones were the best for beginners. I even installed a virtual machine and briefly tested out Ubuntu and Linux Mint. And I liked what I was seeing here. But I wasn't fully convinced yet. I had heard so much about how you can customize your Linux system, but I wasn't really seeing much of that with GNOME and Cinnamon, the respective desktop environments for Ubuntu and Mint. So as I looked for options that better suited my needs, I discovered KDE Plasma, the most customizable, fully fledged desktop environment in the Linux ecosystem. KDE had everything I needed, and then some. You can really just change everything. And if there isn't a setting or a thing you can tweak within the UI, you can just go and edit the config files, or create your own SVG files to make your own theme. Bingo! Ultimate customizability with the reliability of a desktop environment. There was just one tiny little itty-bitty problem with this. Ubuntu and Mint aren't exactly made to run KDE Plasma. Of course, this is Linux and you can do whatever the hell you want, but when you put a desktop environment in a distro that wasn't made for that desktop in mind, things might break a little bit. So I had to go and look for a distro that was as beginner-friendly as Ubuntu and Mint, but that was also able to run KDE Plasma natively. That's great! I hear you say. Why not go with Kubuntu? For those who don't know, Kubuntu is just Ubuntu, but instead of using GNOME as its DE, it uses KDE Plasma. Sounds like the perfect solution to my problems, right? Well, not quite. By the time I had heard of Kubuntu, I also had heard about some major criticisms against Ubuntu and Canonical, the company that develops Ubuntu. Long story short, Canonical has a way of packaging programs called snaps, which function very similarly to Flatpaks. The problem with snaps is the way Canonical uses them, which is to say that they want to force everyone to use snaps. And forcing things is kind of the antithesis of what Linux stands for. Not to mention that there were rumors that they were collecting users' data and sending them to Amazon, which is, fuck that. So I decided to just stay away from Ubuntu in general. So if Ubuntu wasn't an option, what was I supposed to use? Simple. Ubuntu and Linux Mint aren't the only distros that exist. There are hundreds, if not thousands of distros out there for all intents, purposes, and needs. With just a bit more digging, I discovered the distro that might solve things for me. Fedora. Fedora is an interesting distro. It's based on another distro called Red Hat, developed by a company of the same name. They basically made Fedora to get the latest and greatest features to test for Red Hat, so it's basically their testing ground. You're basically doing beta testing for free. At the same time, it's fairly beginner-friendly and it natively supported KDE, so the decision was made. There was no turning back now. I drank the Kool-Aid and I was ready to step into the rabbit hole. So that was it. I had decided Fedora KDE would be my distro of choice. I loaded the ISO into a USB, booted up the live environment, and then started the installation. Little did I know though that I was about to experience hell in order to use my system the way I used it in Windows. Because Fedora is sort of used as a testing ground for features that would be implemented into Red Hat, this distro felt like it was still in alpha the whole time I used it. It was usable to an extent, but it was very buggy and unstable. Although in all fairness, I probably should have done more research into it, and I should have known what to expect before excitedly jumping right in. But I didn't, and now I had to suffer the consequences of it. In order for you to better understand my struggle, let's break down all the things I use my computer for. I am an artist of many kinds. That is to say, I do many forms of art. I primarily do music, which means I need software to record, arrange, mix, and master my songs. I use FL Studio for that. As an independent musician, however, I'm also responsible for making the cover arts for my songs. This means I need software where I can draw, edit pictures, and do all the graphic design shenanigans. And besides that, I also like to draw sometimes. I used to use a
totally legally
obtained copy of Photoshop for all that, but A, that's not available on Linux, even under Wine, and B, the only thing I'd be happy with Adobe doing is them jumping into a Blender. Now, there are some alternatives to Photoshop out there. Many people will recommend GIMP, and even Photopea, which is basically a website clone of Photoshop. I, however, decided to use Krita instead. I was actually already using Krita in Windows, and for what I need to do, it's pretty much perfect. Nothing fancy, but it does the job pretty well. Oh, and speaking of jumping into a Blender, I also started learning how to use Blender at around the same time I jumped into Linux, so let's add that to the list as well. I also do video editing, as you can see. I used to use a
totally legally
copy of Premiere Pro, but I don't need to repeat myself. I now use DaVinci Resolve. But in order for me to make videos, there needs to be footage for me to edit, so I also need to have OBS for that, as well as for live streaming. And of course, I also can't live out gaming. I mostly play games in Steam, with the only exceptions being Minecraft and League of Legends. Lastly, I need to communicate with people online, and the default option everyone chooses is Discord. So now that we have our list, let's start breaking down how my experience with each of these entries went. Luckily for me, most things I use have native Linux support. Krita, Blender, and OBS are open source, and they all have a native Linux version. DaVinci Resolve, Discord, and the Steam client are in open source, but they also have native Linux versions. The only things I use that aren't supported in Linux are FL Studio and League of Legends. But just because something has native support doesn't mean that the experience was smooth sailing. Really, the only program that didn't give me any issues was Krita. It worked wonderfully. My tablet's driver, on the other hand, not so much. I use an XP Pen Deco Mini 7, and it's definitely usable on Linux, it just took a little bit of tinkering to get it going. Blender wasn't that bad as well, except for a couple of bugs. Unfortunately, my memory is utter dog shit, so I can't remember exactly what happened, but I can barely recall something going wrong with Blender. I don't know. The real problem started with OBS. Like I mentioned, OBS is open source and has native Linux support. What they don't mention, however, is that the support gets more limited if you're using a distro that isn't based on Debian, which, if you've been paying attention, Fedora isn't. What this means in practice is that installing plugins is a little bit more difficult. If you install a Flatpak build of OBS, there are some plugins you can install directly from the App Store in your distro. Convenient, right? Emphasis on some though. Depending on what you need, the selection of plugins can be very limiting. There is a way of adding plugins externally, but since Flatpaks are meant to be kind of isolated from the system, the directory for the plugins is a bit buried and hard to find. Not impossible, just a little bit more difficult. If you go for the regular package build of OBS instead, installing plugins is a bit easier, but you'll have to find a specific directory for that. You also have to make sure the plugin you want is available in Linux, because some of them aren't, and you also have to make sure it doesn't come in a .deb file because those can only be used in Debian-based distros, which again, Fedora isn't. And that's not even mentioning that some of the sources might work differently than in Windows, or even not be there at all. Sometimes screen capture can just straight up not work, audio sources can get funky, and in some distros OBS doesn't even come with a browser source. This all depends on what distro you use and the hardware you have for your PC, so you might not even run into these issues in your case, or you might even have some other issues that I didn't even mention here. It's all very case-specific situations, so this is something to be wary about. To make matters worse, DaVinci Resolve is a pain in the dick to use in Linux, which, considering they have native Linux support, What the fuck? First off, DaVinci is just a pain to install. Anyone with at least some experience in Linux will rave all about how easy it is to install programs, and for the most part, that is 100% true. It is incredibly easy. With just one command in the terminal, you can install like 50 programs if you wanted to, all at the same time. So why the fuck did Blackmagic decide to make it so difficult? I can install Kdenlive, a free and open source video editor, with the same command that I use to install all other programs I have, and it works with no issues. Blackmagic has zero excuses for this. Anyway, once you get over the dreadful installation process, you can finally import your video footage and... Wait, what the... Oh yeah, did I forget to mention, the free version of Resolve doesn't support H.264 or H.265 codecs! You know, the most commonly used video codecs? The wild thing about this is just in Linux. When I used Resolve in Windows, the codecs worked just fine. So now I have to find ways to convert my files to DNX HD MOVs before importing them to Resolve, which ate a huge chunk of my storage. And for someone who doesn't have the budget for dozens and dozens of terabytes, that's a huge fucking deal. I will say though that the codec issue is more of a recent thing for me. I didn't really make videos after switching to Linux for the first time, so I didn't even use Resolve for long enough to deal with that. And if that wasn't enough, I also had issues when it came to gaming. First of all, there's no way to play League of Legends in Linux. Not since they implemented Vanguard anyway, so I had to give that up. Minecraft's launcher has native Linux support, as well as the CurseForge launcher, which is the one I use for all my mods. I didn't have any issues with Minecraft, other than my PC being kind of a potato. Steam, on the other hand, worked fine, but a lot of games on Steam don't have Linux support, so you have to run them under a compatibility layer called Proton, which is a fork of Wine. Games under Proton work fine for the most part, but I did run into a lot of issues when I played certain games, especially games with 3D graphics. Even if it was something simple like Schedule 1 or Dinkum, KDE would often freeze and I would have to manually restart it. Hell, KDE would freeze even if I was just in edit mode trying to customize my panels and widgets. And the worst of them all, FL Studio. The only way to use FL Studio in Linux is to use it under Wine. What Wine does is essentially take calls from the Windows programs and translate them into something that Linux can understand. This can work to an extent, but for some programs, this might not be enough. In the case of FL Studio, this meant slightly lower performance and a lot of visual bugs and VST flickering. I spent several hours trying to get these issues fixed, but to no avail. Now, I do want to make something very clear here. This is not entirely Fedora's fault. Again, I definitely should have done more research into this distro so I would know what to expect. And I also should have made a better plan for what I was going to use the system for, so that I knew how to approach it. That whole thing with the list in the apps, that's what I should have done before jumping in. If you're truly interested in using Linux, please make a list like that before jumping right in. Think of what you use a computer for, what programs you currently use, what's available in Linux and what isn't, how to set everything up, and what things can break or not work in your software and how to deal with those issues. But alas, I didn't do any of that, and I ended up getting overwhelmed by all these issues. So much so that I had to make a decision and go back to Windows. Except this time, I had a new mindset about how I wanted to operate my system and what I wanted from it. I didn't just want to become a peasant under Microsoft's fist like I used to be. I was going to take control of my system, whether the trillion-dollar company wanted me or not. I used a deep learning script, and I even installed WinHog to make my OS look exactly the way I wanted to. Which, by the way, was a great decision in hindsight because it helped me learn the basics of how to use code to customize things. Something that might be useful later. Now, all of this is not to say that I did not enjoy my time with Fedora. It did open my eyes to how wonderful Linux is, and it helped me get used to the basics of using a Linux system. However, I use my computer to do my music commissions, which are my only source of income. And when my OS is as unstable and buggy as Fedora was for me, it's just not something I could rely on. Speaking of commissions, are you tired of browsing the internet for hours looking for a song to use in your content? Or do you perhaps want to take your music to the next level? Well, lucky for you, I'm here to help. As I mentioned before, I do music commissions for a living, and there are 3 kinds of commissions that I do: full song, mixing and mastering, and vocals. A full song commission is where I make, you guessed it, a full song. This means that I will make everything from the ground up: drums, instruments, bass, etc. This commission also includes mixing and mastering. Speaking of which, if you already have a song that's done but you want someone else to mix and master it, I have a commission for that as well. You just send me the stems and I'll take care of the rest. And if you're making a cover or already have the instrumental for a song and need help incorporating the vocals into it, look no further than my vocals commission. If any of this interests you, there are a couple ways you can reach out. There is a form on my website that you can fill out with all the details of what you want for your commission. You can also reach out to me on Discord if you're already on my friends list. Or if you're already on my friends list, you can refer someone else to me and then I can add them. And if Discord isn't your thing, you can also send me an email at the email address on the screen. All the links will be in the description. Do note that I only accept payments through PayPal. I also require all my clients to read and accept my terms of service, which will be provided in the form of a PDF document. Any information about payments, fees, or details I didn't mention in this video will be found in the terms of service document. If you've never heard of my work before and you want to know what to expect, well, take a listen.
So kiss me till it's a little bit too late, a little bit too late. Decisions I'm having.
If you like what you heard, then make sure to go to the link in the description and fill out that form. It supports me directly and it keeps me doing what I love. With that said, let's go back to the video. My return to Windows wasn't a defeat, it was a tactical retreat. Despite my experience with Fedora being kinda bad, I was pretty much converted. Even while I was in Windows again, I was still keeping up with Linux news and watching tutorials, also that I could come back stronger. All this learning made me more and more excited to go back to Linux as the days went by. I just felt this really big urge to tinker with my system until it was perfect for my needs. But I couldn't just go back to Fedora. That distro was just too buggy and not customizable enough for me to go back to it. I had to aim for something bigger, Arch Linux. Arch is a very infamous distro, mainly for how difficult it is to install, how convoluted it is to maintain, and how proud its fanbase is for managing to do all those things. Some might say too proud, but I didn't really want all that. For me, the appeal of Arch is how minimal and customizable it is, and how much control and agency it gives you. You're basically just building the entire system from scratch, and you can put whatever you want in it. Case in point, it's a system where you choose everything, which can be an advantage and a disadvantage, but that's a whole topic for another video. There was a big issue for me though. Like I mentioned before, my storage capabilities are very limited. This means I can't really do backups for my files. I simply can't afford the extra storage. I just store all the important stuff in my external HDD, and I use my SSDs for the OS, apps, and my games, which luckily are things that can be recovered relatively easily if I delete them. What does this have to do with Arch? Well, since you have to partition your drives by inputting commands in a terminal rather than using a fancy user interface, I wasn't confident enough that I can handle that, and I was just too scared to lose all my files. So the mission now was to find an Arch-based distro that made the installation as easy as it was in the other distros that I tried. I had heard of a couple distros that could fulfill that purpose. The first one was Manjaro. The goal of Manjaro was to make Arch easy for beginners, which sounds exactly like what I was looking for, right? But as I looked into it, I found a lot of things that made me want to stay as far away from it as possible. From expired certificates to crashing the entire AOR. Just all the nope. I had to keep on looking. I eventually heard of two distros that might solve all my issues, EndeavourOS and CachyOS. Both of these are essentially just Arch but with a graphical installer. The difference between them is that while EndeavourOS aims to offer as close to a vanilla Arch experience as possible, CachyOS is more opinionated. It's advertised as a gaming distro, and it has kernel and package optimizations that make the system blazingly fast, which for my potato PC was really good news to hear. I spent some time deciding on which one to go with, considering the pros and cons, and thinking about what I needed from the distros. Ultimately, I decided on CachyOS. The optimizations were just too good to ignore. Installing CachyOS was as easy as it was advertised. I even had the option to choose pretty much every desktop environment available, and even some tiny window managers. But while I do plan on tinkering with those in the future, I still need the reliability that comes with a fully fledged desktop environment, so I decided to go back to KDE Plasma to have that reliability, and also to be able to customize it to my heart's content. I was also able to get all my apps and files set up pretty easily. What took me the longest was FL Studio, mainly because I wanted to try to fix the visual bugs I was experiencing in Fedora, which were still chasing me even in Cachy. The first big issue I encountered was that FL Studio was really slow to open project files. I'm talking several minutes of waiting just to get a project file open. It was so bad, at one point I even considered dual booting so I could still do my job. Luckily, the issue was solved when I made a clone of the Bottles instance I was using for FL. Why would that fix anything? Well, because the original instance of Bottles I was using was sitting in my secondary SSD, and when I made a duplicate of it, it got copied to my main SSD where the OS was installed. I guess I got lucky there with the fix, but yay, that's one issue fixed. The visual issues were also very easily solved by experimenting with different settings, renderers, etc. The best part about this is that getting FL set up and going was the biggest hurdle I've had to deal with in CachyOS. As I was troubleshooting and setting things up, I couldn't help but notice just how insanely fast and snappy the distro is. Linux is already known for being very lightweight, especially compared to the bloat factory that is Windows. But CachyOS was even faster than Fedora. I'm not sure if it's all the optimizations the CachyOS team did or if it's simply just the Arch magic at play here, but either way, I am very happy with this performance boost. But good performance can't make up for functionality and stability, so how well do the apps I use work? Long story short, extremely well. Short story long, and there are some caveats. Why don't we go back to the list of things I use my computer for and see how well CachyOS handles all those tasks and programs. Starting with music production and using FL Studio, the experience hasn't really been any different from using FL Studio on Windows, once I fixed the major bugs and issues I was having. I still get flickering in some VST windows, which can be fixed by detaching the plugin window, weirdly enough. I've also run into some issues with a certain VST and the way it handles its windows, making it so that I couldn't open the plugin window for that VST without the whole program freezing. But it's not something I couldn't work around, so it's not a big deal. Other than that, FL Studio works pretty much flawlessly. Drawing in Krita also worked perfectly. My drawing tablet worked with no issues, except I had different configurations than what I'm used to, and I couldn't find a way to change them in the system, so I had to go to the XPpen website to check if I could download the drivers from my tablet in Linux, and turns out I can. So I got that set up, got my buttons back the way I wanted them, and I was able to draw the same way I've been doing it for years. Same thing goes for Blender. I don't use Blender with my drawing tablet, so I didn't have to worry about that. And the app has a native Linux build, so it works incredibly well. I did manage to run into an issue where if I tried exporting a model as an FBX, I couldn't see the settings to export it, so I had to download the Flatpak version and that got it fixed. As for the issues with DaVinci Resolve, I've talked about them plenty, and they're not any different here. No matter which distro you use, DaVinci is always a pain in the ass. Although I did start trying to use Kdenlive, a free and open source video editor, I'm still trying to get used to its interface and workflow, and I'm not in love about the fact that I can't change any settings when I export the video. If anyone is watching this and has more experience with Kdenlive, please tell me how I get my H.264 videos to not look and sound like they have negative bitrate, please. But yeah. Video editing has been a little bit iffy, but it can work with tucked up in a prayer, so to speak. Recording with OBS has also worked flawlessly. I haven't tried streaming yet, but I do plan on streaming again soon. I even redid all my scenes and I managed to use all the plugins that I needed, so definitely be on the lookout for that. I've also had no issues with gaming. I'm not much of a competitive player aside from playing League, so I didn't have to deal with any of the kernel level anti-cheat stuff. Although I am starting to get into Dota 2, which so far has been working with no issues, and my brother has finally convinced me to try out Overwatch, which I haven't tried because of Battle.net account stuff. Outside of that, I've been playing a lot of Silksong, Balatro, Schedule 1, Dinkum, and some other indie titles on Steam. I haven't had any issues with those. They work flawlessly in Linux. Hell, I even played Halo Master Chief Collection on Steam for a bit, but that didn't last long because Silksong was coming out soon. But case in point, it works really well. Minecraft also works with no issues here. I just wish I could play with shaders without turning the game into a PowerPoint presentation, but that's just my PC being a potato, not a Linux issue. Lastly, I do have to mention that Discord has been giving me a couple issues. The first one is that the first time I got an update, it wouldn't update on its own. Instead, I had to download the build from their website and manually set it up. Then I realized I could just use the Black Dot version of Discord, and I haven't had any issues with updates since then. I have, however, had issues with screen sharing. This has only happened twice so far, but for some reason, hardware acceleration wasn't enabled, and without it, I can't share my screen on Discord. I'm not sure why I had issues with that a second time. Maybe I clicked on a setting that fucked with that, either inside of Discord or in the software I use to manage Flatpak permissions. It's weird, but at least it's working now, and I haven't had any issues with the app since then, other than, them being Discord. As you can see, I've only run into minor issues with CachyOS, as opposed to Fedora, where my system seemed to be breaking anytime I did something I didn't like. And I would attribute most of those issues to support for those apps in Arch being iffy at best. Overall, I'm beyond happy with my experience with CachyOS, and I'm genuinely excited every time I boot into it. I never got that feeling with Windows. Here, I'm just at peace, and I don't think I'm going back to Windows ever again. A couple of days ago, I completely got rid of Windows in my PC. To any normal person, including me just a couple of years ago, that would seem like an insane thing to do. And yet, I did it. And while there may have been bumps and hurdles in the way, I eventually reached calmer waters, and I'm more than happy to stay here. Using Linux is not gonna be for everyone, especially those who have use cases that require Windows or Mac-only tools that would simply not work on Linux. And even if they do work, sometimes that will require a lot of tinkering and troubleshooting. Hell, even Linux native programs can have issues, but then again, Windows also has a lot of issues, especially recently. The point of this video is not to make it look like Linux is this perfect thing that will solve all your problems, but to plant the seeds on people watching this and let them know that it's possible to use Linux with nearly no issues. With enough research and planning, you can take advantage of a system which you can choose and build for yourself, and yourself only. Even if you're as tech illiterate as I am, seriously, just because I installed another operating system doesn't mean I know what I'm doing. And modern distros make it so easy to use the system without even having to know what you're doing. At least until you have to troubleshoot things. Look, I'm not gonna blame or judge anyone for sticking to what they know, or for using tools that only work with a big tech system. If you take nothing else from this video, let this be the one thing. You can still have control and agency over your digital life. Just because a billion-trillion-dollar company tells you that, hey, you should use this app or you should use this thing or whatever, doesn't mean you have to. You can still choose for yourself. And the more people come here, the better it will be for everyone. That's why I advocate so much about using Linux, even if it annoys the shit out of my friends. So if you're curious, get a virtual machine and try some distros out, or dual boot with Windows and Linux if you're brave enough. Mess around with desktop environments, try installing some apps and tools and see how they work for you. Just try it out. I promise you that even if you don't like using Linux, you will at the very least learn something new. And what's not to like about that? And speaking of liking, how about hitting that like button and leaving a comment? It really helps my videos get seen more. And if you don't want to miss any of my upcoming videos or streams, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Also be sure to check out my website on your way out too. You can buy all my music directly in there, you can request song commissions, and I even have a Patreon style membership and a donation box if you'd like to support me directly. That is gonna be it for me. Thank you so much for watching.